Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Barry Jones with SP History back at it. And we are beginning episode 3. Uh, in the totality of all the episodes, I think it's episode 188. But within the series, the Oakcliff series, I believe this is episode 3. And so I want to open up my document here. And of course, we've been starting off answering questions. And I've had to modify slightly my questions, or at least the format, because yesterday I went way too long. I apologize for that. And people banging at the door. You're allowed to reserve these rooms for 2 hours at a time. And I got in here a half hour early and still ran out of time. So try not to do that anymore. So I may have to. Yesterday was kind of unusual because I didn't answer at the end of the first day. I forgot to go back and answer the questions. So I tried to do both yesterday, the day before's questions and yesterday's questions. So I'm back on schedule today. And today the highlight color is light blue. So as you can see, with respect to JD Tippett, there are no questions specifically to answer today. He's already dead. We've already learned that. But there will be more to talk about. With respect to Captain Westbrook and Croy, which I have 2 slides worth of questions. In the second slide, we're going to be looking at that wallet that Westbrook produced at the scene, the Tippett scene. And I think that wallet is a real clue as to whom was being set up. We just always naturally assumed it was Oswald. I'm starting to think, I think differently. I've been thinking that way for a long time. And when you just look at the evidence and which evidence gets planted and which evidence doesn't, it points in a different direction. Anyway, we'll look at that today. The origin of the 38 revolver that Dallas police claimed, that's key right there. Oswald tried to fire at them at the theater. Again, that presuppositional viewpoint, taking as a matter of fact the evidence as presented by the Warren Commission or by the Dallas police, by the FBI, by the CIA for years, that's the starting point. And that most people had, including myself. And I've learned that you can't do that anymore. The Dallas police, I've talked ad nauseum about the FBI and the CIA being corrupt, Warren Commission. But how about the Dallas police? They found out after Henry Wade retired, he was that DA that had the fantastic conviction rate. And they found out most of the cases were fixed. And they're having to go back now and unwind them. There's lawsuits galore. Dallas County ended up being the highest rate of wrongful convictions in the nation during this era. So you can't believe anything Dallas police is telling you either. That's quite a revelation when you come to the point where you can't trust the investigators. It's supposed to be apolitical, not have a dog in this fight. Turns out they all do. Next question, what happened to Westbrook's ID and address report? He ordered an ID and address report and all the 24 witnesses in the theater at the time of Oswald's arrest. And so we're going to talk about that, because that, if it exists, if we can get our hands on it, would tell a huge story about who was in that theater at the time of Oswald's arrest. And of course, then that has ramifications going forward as well. Anyway, next question. How did Westbrook's planted evidence force the hand of Dallas police? And it did. Pretty quickly realized we've got evidence that's been planted that doesn't fit the profile of the guy that we just arrested. So now we have to shoehorn it somehow. Last question. What happened to Westbrook and Croy after November 22? Pretty interesting going forward. Here's a question I want to readdress. I've talked about him going to his rooming house, Oswald, when he left Dallas and came across to Oak Cliff, but I didn't give a reason why. I don't believe I did. And I want to today. Somebody brought it up in the comment section and it jogged my memory. So I want to go back and touch on that today as well. How did he avoid police detection at the theater? Yeah, he does all this out, he expends all this effort, energy to draw the police to the theater. Then once they get to the theater, he just like disappears, and they go after the cutout or the asset, Lee Harvey Oswald. Last question. Once Oswald was arrested and the entire free world saw his image on TV, what happens next to the nearly identical Oswald doppelganger? You'd think things would get pretty precarious for someone who's a spitting image of Lee Harvey Oswald after Oswald's arrest. No questions today on 10th and Patton. A couple of questions about the theater. Why was Jack Ruby at the theater? We learned yesterday that he's the guy that fed the information to his buddy Tommy Rowe, who then fed it to Johnny Brewer, who then went and bullied Julia Postal into calling the police. And it turns out the only one in that whole scenario that ever saw the man that they were saying was a suspicious man inside the theater was Jack Ruby. None of the other ones even saw him, though they claimed they did. So why was he there? We may not get to the why necessarily today, but we're gonna dance around it. If Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested and escorted out the front of the Texas theater, who was the Oswald that was arrested and escorted out the back of the theater? Well, folks don't know this story. If Lee Harvey Oswald was sitting on the ground floor of the theater when he was arrested, who was the Oswald that was sitting in the balcony? Kind of giving it away by the questions there. All right, no questions on the evidence side. Some random questions. How did Dallas police cover-up of Jack Ruby's presence at the Texas theater impact the case? Huge impact. Huge with a capital H. Just like if they had acknowledged, or maybe the FBI, the Warren Commission had acknowledged that there was a second Oswald, how that would have affected the investigation of the case. But of course, we know none of that. It's been up to researchers to discover that. And then how does knowledge of the existence of two CIA planes in Dallas on November 22, 1963, the first prearranged to transport Oswald, and the second, a last-minute arrangement to transport the doppelganger, how does all that impact the case? And of course, it does. And we'll look at that. All right, we have made it to 145. You remember when we left off at 144, 26 police officers descend on the Texas Theater from across town, not far away, less than a mile, at the Tippit scene, because they were ordered there by their superior officer on the scene, Captain Westbrook. And of course, Westbrook leads the charge, drives right up to the front, as you can see, parks his car right under the marquee there. And for a guy who allegedly snuck into the theater without paying for a ticket, this is a remarkable show or display of intuition on behalf of the cops, or it's not. I prefer to believe it's not. I believe Westbrook always knew. Of course he knew. He's the one that took Oswald to the theater to begin with. And he knows this is where it's going to end up. He's always known this is where it's going to end up. The photographer is in place. We'll talk about him today. Reed, the guy that took the photo of the buses, or the one bus, the front picture, the back picture, also took the picture of the sixth floor window, Texas School Book Depository, ends up here an hour later, just happens to know that this is going to be where the arrest happens and is right there waiting to snap this famous photograph. It's all been prearranged. All right. Now, according to Dallas police, they report that Oswald resists arrest, pulls a .38 revolver, and he tries to shoot, but the firing pin is defective. It just click, 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 click. And Meanwhile, according to witnesses, he's yelling out, "I am not resisting arrest." Now, I've wondered about that for years. It doesn't make sense. The JFK movie does a great job portraying this scene. They show him trying to fire this pistol, yelling, "I am not resisting arrest. I am not." And look, and what the JFK movie did was take what the Dallas police said and they shot that footage. And it doesn't make sense. Why would you yell, "I'm not resisting arrest," when you're trying to fire a 38 at the police officers? Makes no sense. Unless, well, it will make sense by the end of today, hopefully, or by the end of the series for sure. But he is saying this or crying this out for the benefit of the 24 witnesses in the theater and to prevent something from happening because Oswald, being an intelligence agent or asset himself, knows how these things work. And when, every action has a reaction, when the first action happens, which I don't want to spill the beans yet, he realizes he's being set up to be killed. He's not supposed to live to be arrested. He knows that. This is his line of work. So instinctively, he yells out, "I am not resisting arrest," so as to prevent what was supposed to happen. And it worked. It worked. We'll talk more about that as we go. So here he is being brought out. Um, all right, that was 1:45. In that same time frame, in the next 3 minutes, this is that report that Westbrook orders, and he gives the order to Lieutenant Cunningham and J.B. Tony, another police officer. Go around and don't let anybody leave. Get the names, get the addresses, look at their IDs of all 24 people, all of the witnesses in the theater. And when he finished the report, there were two names on that list that could never appear publicly. One of them was unknown because the guy didn't have any ID on him. They found him in the balcony. The other one was Jack Ruby. And Westbrook knew those names, those two individuals cannot ever appear on a list of witnesses that were in the theater at the time Oswald was arrested. Cannot, absolutely cannot. So when the Warren Commission asked for the list, Westbrook said it was lost. I'm smiling because this is a pretty repetitive theme. When the wallet becomes inconvenient, it gets lost. When this list, this report, becomes inconvenient because of these two individuals, it gets lost. How many times have we seen this before? Evidence that would have been exculpatory, or at least sent the investigation in another direction, gets lost. I could go on for days on that. Neither one of the two officers that conducted the report or wrote up the report and conducted the examination of the 24 witnesses were ever called before the Warren Commission to testify. That also is a theme. They find out in advance what these witnesses are going to say. And if they fit the narrative, they get called. If they don't fit the narrative, a lot of them didn't even get called so as not to complicate things. According to, now, by the way, you say, well, if the list didn't exist and you've never seen it, how do you know Jack Ruby's name was on it? We know Jack Ruby was in there because there's a witness we're going to talk about later. His name is George Applin, who identified Jack Ruby to the FBI, saying, "That's the man I talked to in the Texas theater. He was sitting right behind Oswald." when Oswald was arrested, I had a conversation with him. He even told the FBI what the conversation was. Basically told Ruby, you better look out. Here comes the police. Better move. They're coming right for your area. And Ruby turned and looked at him, got a full face look. And 2 days later, after Ruby kills Oswald, the guy's like, George Abson's like, that's the guy I talked to in a theater. So we have an eyewitness. And as far as the doppelganger is concerned, uh, we know he has no ID on him because he gave up his ID at the church, the Abundant Life Church, after he shot or after he participated in the shooting of Tippit. Remember at the Abundant Life Church, he met up with Westbrook and he gave him his wallet, his 38, and his light colored jacket. We've already seen the light colored jacket has already made its appearance. Westbrook planted it behind the Texaco station. And we've already seen the wallet, which he showed Bob Barrett, the FBI agent, at the Tippit scene. So he's used 2 of the 3 pieces of evidence already in the minutes after he met up with the doppelganger at the Abundant Life Church. The third one will make its appearance, makes its appearance when we get to the arrest of Oswald. That is the murder weapon. That's the gun that killed or participated in the killing of Tippit. And now all of a sudden they're saying Oswald had it. And of course, when they test it, it's going to show that it has been used and there's going to be 4 shells missing and all the things because it literally came from the scene. And then I might as well go ahead and say it. They planted it on Oswald so that they would have a pretext to shoot him. And then after he's dead, they hold up the revolver and they show everybody this is what he was trying to shoot us with. Let's test it and see if it ties him to Tippit. Ah, it does. Voila. So all 3 pieces of evidence that Westbrook took off of the doppelganger at the Abundant Life Church have now been used. 2 of them against the doppelganger and 1 of them against Oswald. But anyway, we'll get more into that later. All right, back to Butch Burroughs. This is if you're standing on a stage, this is what the theater looked like. And Burroughs, who's witnessing all this, remember, he's the guy that said that Oswald was there at 107, bought a ticket, gave him the ticket stub, then came out, bought popcorn from him at 115. Burroughs is a problem for the narrative. He sticks to the story. No, Oswald was here. That guy that you just arrested and took out, that guy was here at 107. I don't know what else you're saying he did, but he was in my theater at 107. I took his ticket. He came out and bought popcorn from me at 115. He was here. He's a problem. Julia Postal has played, she's played her part, and she was completely unwitting. She got bullied into making a false accusation. She clearly feels badly about it, which is why we learned yesterday she burst into tears. Burroughs isn't finished, though. This guy's observant, and he's like a bulldog when it comes to telling the truth. He's not going to be moved. He says that, quote, 3 or 4 minutes later, so we're about to 148, 149 time frame, Dallas police, after having taken Oswald from the main floor, arrested him, taking him out the front. He says Dallas police arrested an Oswald lookalike, that's what he called him, who was in the balcony. Burroughs said the second man looked almost like Oswald, like he was his brother or something. That is reminiscent of that woman at who witnessed the doppelganger, said if it wasn't him, it was his twin. I mean, he looked just like Oswald. So when Burroughs was asked, did you see both men that you could juxtapose one against the other, compare and contrast? He says, yes, I could see both of them. They looked alike. This isn't new to us, right? We've been seeing this all along consistently. Everyone who witnessed the doppelganger, whether from Texas School Book Depository Building, making his way to the Nash Rambler, or making his way after being dropped off in Oak Cliff over by Marsalis Avenue, making his way along 10th Avenue. All those witnesses, every time they're presented with a picture of the real Lee Harvey Oswald, having seen the doppelganger, they say, yeah, that's him. That's him. According to Burroughs, the second Oswald was arrested, handcuffed, and taken by police out the back of the theater into the alleyway. So if you're Burroughs, you're confused. Like that old saying in Steel Magnolias, which is my wife's favorite movie, one of her favorite movies. I'm so confused, I don't know whether to scratch my watch or wind my butt. That's how Burroughs has got to feel at this point. He's like, wait a second. Uh, Two guys that look alike. One gets arrested out the front, one gets arrested out the back. One's sitting on the main floor, one's sitting in the balcony. One's wearing a long sleeve brown shirt, one's wearing a white t-shirt. What the hell's going on here? But it wasn't just him. Bernard Haire, who had a little hobby shop. It's called Bernard's or Bernie's Hobby House. It's two doors down from the Texas Theater. Obviously, when all these police show up, causes all this commotion, he goes out to see what the commotion is. But there's such a crowd, he can't see. So for some reason, he goes into the back of his store and exits through the back into the alleyway. I I have long thought that he was doing this because he thought he was going to go around to the other side, come out the same alley entry or exit that Oswald had earlier, and come at it from the other side. I don't know. He never explained it to my knowledge. But anyway, he goes out the back of his store. Now he's in the back alley and he arrives there at exactly the same time. The rear door of the theater, which is two doors down, opens, and here comes Dallas police hauling a young white man out the back of the door of the theater, and he's in handcuffs. It's the same story Butch Burroughs just told. And then they put him in a squad car and they drove off. Here's the in 63, this is sort of what it looked like. The circle in the middle is the sign, the marquee of the Texas Theater. Bernie's Hobby House, as you can see, is a couple doors down. That's the second circle. So Haire thinks, oh, well, whatever that commotion was out front, they didn't get to see the real action. I got to see the guy get arrested and taken out the back. So he goes home thinking that he just witnessed Lee Harvey Oswald being taken out the back, saw him be arrested, got to see the alleged assassin, right? I can see him telling his wife. And he's watching on TV and he says that they flashed the picture and he's like, yeah, that's the guy I saw. I can tell, I can just see him telling his wife, that's the guy, that's the guy. And then as they tell the story and they show the expanded film footage, it shows the front of the Texas Theater. It's like, I can see him looking at his wife like, well, who's the guy I saw coming out the back? Because they're saying it's the guy coming out the front who's the assassin, but they're identical. So now we have a second witness to two Oswalds in the theater, the same theater. This is a mistake. They were never supposed to end up in the same place at the same time when the arrest goes down. Just like when they started the morning at the Texas School Book Depository Building. Oswald was on the second floor. The doppelganger was on the sixth floor. I think that says a lot, by the way, because immediately the police are going to zero in on that sixth floor window and all the goings on up on the sixth floor, which is where the doppelganger was. So they're not in the same place and they don't exit the Texas School Book Depository Building in the same way or in the same area. You know, one goes out the front, one goes out the back to make it just as simple as possible. But and one takes the bus and one goes gets hops a ride in an Ash Rambler. But then they end up on the Marcel. You know, the plan is for Oswald to get off at a Marcellus bus stop, and where does the doppelganger get dropped? Right along Marcellus Avenue and the intersection of 10th Avenue, 10th Street. So they're always kind of in the same locale, vicinity, but they can't be in the same place at the same time. People are going to put two and two together. And what we've just seen is Butch Burroughs put two and two together. Bernard Haire is putting two and two together. Interestingly, the Dallas police, there's two documents that prove that Dallas police knew in advance, know at the time, and know afterwards who and what is going on. According to the homicide report on Officer J.D. Tippett, this is the official homicide report. It says, quote, and I'll show it to you here in a minute. The suspect, in the Tippett slang, was later arrested in the balcony at the Texas Theater. Bingo. We finally hit on a true statement by Dallas police, and that is that the suspect in the Tippett slang is the same guy they arrested in the balcony of the theater. And it is him. It's the doppelganger. And he's the one, according to witnesses, we've just followed his whole trail over here. He's the one that pulled his 38 out and shot him 4 times and fled the scene. So in a moment of, I don't know, was it unguarded? Was it reckless? Was it a mistake? I don't know. But right there in the homicide report, the Dallas police state the truth. The Dallas detective L.D. Stringfellow wrote a report to Captain Ganaway identifying who was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater. He calls him Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, now, wait a second. We're being told Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested on the main floor and taken out the front. We know the guy in the balcony was taken out the back. We know the guy on the floor was the real Lee Harvey Oswald. The guy in the balcony was his doppelganger. But here's Dallas police detective saying Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested at the balcony. And here's the homicide report saying the guy in the balcony was the guy who killed Tippett. Wow. It doesn't stop there. When Cunningham and Tony are going around getting names, this is another reason we know that one man, and the guy was in the balcony, did not have ID on him, is because of this incident right here. Cunningham and Tony are going around questioning all these 24 witnesses, getting their IDs, their addresses. The young man in the balcony that didn't have any ID was identified for Cunningham and Tony by Deputy Sheriff Bill Corson. And he told Cunningham and Tony it was Lee Harvey Oswald. Now think about why Westbrook had to tell Warren Commission the list had disappeared. Imagine for a minute that he produces a list, gives it to the Warren Commission, and they're scanning down the list and they come to Jack Ruby's name. Oh, and then right underneath that, they come to Lee Harvey Oswald's name. Wait a second. In addition to the guy that was the suspect that we took out the front, we're looking for names in addition to that, not including that. That list is that is the list of the people after Oswald was taken out the front. In other words, there were 2 Lee Harvey Oswalds, and that would be what that list would reveal to the Warren Commission. That's why he couldn't give him the list. It's lost. The first document that I referenced, which is published in the Warren volumes, was a homicide report. It was prepared by Captain Talbert, and he was questioned extensively by the Warren Commission, but he was never asked the pertinent question about his presence or his activities at the theater. This is another trick of investigators. Okay, if it's too obvious and we can't not call this witness, then we'll call him and we'll just dance around the topic that we know we don't want to talk about, and we'll ask him all these periphery questions that really don't pertain. That's what they did. This is what Jim Garrison, when he's reading through the Warren report, you see in that scene, that JFK movie, he keeps saying, he's reading it, he's like, ask him the question, ask him the question, ask him the question, because a seasoned district attorney would know Talbert, who was in the theater, needs to be asked about these 24 witnesses because it was a homicide. This homicide report was prepared by him, and it has this interesting statement about the suspect of the Tippit shooting being arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater. Let's ask him the question about that topic. That's a very interesting topic. And they wouldn't ask him the question. The second document, which is also published in the Warren Report, is that memo, it's a slash letter. Stringfellow wrote it, and it was addressed to Captain Ganaway and Lieutenant Jack Revel. Remember Jack Revel? He's the guy that said that when he bumped into, well, he's famous for two things. First, he's the guy 14 minutes after the assassination on his way to Dallas Police headquarters after getting a roster of all the employees at Texas School Board. He's the guy that was driving, and next to him was an Office of Naval Intelligence officer who fed him the name Harvey Lee Oswald from military intelligence. And they gave him the misapplied name and also an old address. And that was a clue that didn't emerge until 78 in House Select Committee hearings, when somebody smartly detected that name and that address could not have come from Human Resources, Texas School Book Depository. And when they traced back to find out where that name came from, they found out it came from a Robert Jones stationed at a nearby base who was an intelligence officer. And he fed it to ONI, and ONI spoon-fed it to Jack Revel. And Jack Revel put the name right at the top of the list of suspects. 14 minutes after the assassination, they already have a name of a suspect, and it came right from military intelligence. Jack Revel was the guy, and it made such an impression on him that a few minutes or an hour or so later, when he's in the parking garage and he runs into James Hosty says, "We caught him. He was a communist. He's been living here. We had him in our reports and our files. We knew he was capable, blah, blah, blah." His name was Leeharveyoswald. And Jack Revel, the guy who had introduced the name to the whole free world, said, "Who?" Because he didn't come up with that name himself. It wasn't the result of his investigative work. He was copying down something that someone was spoon feeding him. And it didn't even register in his mind. It was just letters on a page. So that when he was confronted with it just a couple hours later, he didn't know who it was. But that's Jack Revel. That's the same Jack Revel that this second document was addressed to, which said on November 22, 63, Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater. This homicide report was included with the letter. So they're put together, just like I'm putting them together here. And none of these guys, Stringfellow, Ganaway, Revel, none of them were questioned by the Warren Commission about the letter. It's just like, poof, didn't exist. So they all know, at least the folks in this letter slash memo slash homicide report chain, which would include Stringfellow, Ganaway, Talbert, Revel, the deputy sheriff Corson identified him for Tony and for Cunningham, who this guy in the balcony was without any ID. Cunningham knows, Tony knows, Captain Westbrook. All of these Dallas police officers know who they just arrested in the balcony and took out the back door. They're all identifying him as Leeharveyoswald. But they had to stay silent about it. They know about this second arrest. They know about the identity of the second arrest, who it was, and what he was suspected of doing. They know all this. But we heard nothing. It was crickets. All we heard about was the guy taking out the front. This is the same kind of silence that was imposed on police officers after the wallet becomes an issue, the second wallet. Because now when they arrest Oswald on the floor, take him out, first thing they do is go through his pockets and bingo, he's got a wallet. Now Westbrook knows that, damn it, that wallet I've been showing everybody over at the Tippit scene is now a problem. Nobody has two wallets. So that's when the wallet has to disappear, just like the report had to disappear. Now the wallet has to disappear. And the police department has to go silent on both of these issues. And they were both ordered by Westbrook. You think about it, Westbrook's the one that ordered the report on names, IDs, and addresses. And then he's the one that lost the report when he saw the names. And he's the one a few minutes earlier been over the Tippett scene flashing this wallet around. So Dallas police knows pretty quickly they got to cover up both of these items. And whose actions necessitated or created the need for these two covers? Captain Westbrook. It all started when he went to the Abundant Life Church. He got that wallet from the doppelganger. He got to 38. He got the jacket. He goes and he ditches the jacket or plants it, even though Jimmy Burt said, when I saw him, he was still wearing that jacket. And he had already passed the Texaco station. That's a detail that Westbrook screwed up. Then he goes back to the Tippett scene and he starts showing everybody this wallet with two IDs in it that tie him to the gun, to the kill, and ties it all up. Then they get to the theater and he's got the doppelganger's 38. And I'll show you a witness who says he watched him plant that gun on him, on Oswald, which is why Oswald cries out, I am not resisting arrest, because he knows too what's fixing to happen. They're going to kill him. Whoever ends up with that murder weapon in his hand at the time of arrest, they plan to kill him. The only reason he would put a gun in somebody's hand is to make it look like he's trying to resist arrest. And Westbrook is behind all three of these. All three. So, and subsequently he orders that report. And now they got to get rid of that. They got to get rid of the wallet. They're going to come out with a story that Oswald tried to shoot him with the 38. If you're thinking, the wheels should be spinning because the evidence that is being planted is not evidence that incriminates Oswald. Think about it. The jacket is light colored. Oswald, and I'm saying the real Lee Harvey Oswald, was always wearing a dark colored jacket. So the light colored jacket implicates the doppelganger everybody's been seeing walk along 10th Street. The wallet is the doppelganger's wallet. And we know that because it can't be Oswald. Oswald was arrested with a wallet in his pocket. He bought a ticket at the theater. He bought popcorn at the theater. He had his wallet. So again, the wallet is the doppelganger's. It implicates the doppelganger. And in the 38, the doppelganger shot or participated in the killing of Tippett. It was his gun he gave to Westbrook. He's the one that manually ejected the shell casings onto the ground. All of that points to the doppelganger, not to Oswald. So you start to ask the question in your mind, was Oswald supposed to be arrested? Was he the target? Or was there a miscommunication there? We know there was a mix-up in the sense that both Oswald and doppelganger end up in the same place at the same time at the time of the arrest. That wasn't supposed to happen. So if we know that wasn't supposed to happen, could it not follow that they arrested the wrong guy? Based on Jack Ruby's say-so, that the suspicious man is running around in a long sleeve black, dark brown shirt down here on the main floor, when the guy that they followed to the theater was upstairs in the balcony in a white t-shirt. Just asking some questions. Here's the homicide report, and there's the letter. So you can read it for yourself there. All right. So I got a question yesterday on the comment section about wonder what happened to the doppelganger afterwards. And you got to start with this assumption, and that is, if the doppelganger was supposed to walk out the back and end up a free man, which is what's going to happen. If that was the plan, they would have had all of what happens next already set up, ready to go. Just like they had set up and ready to go an airplane, a CIA plane waiting at Redbird to transport Oswald out of Dallas. It's been idling on the runway at Redbird for an hour. In fact, I'll tell the story, but Wayne January, the owner there, says that he's getting all kinds of calls, nuisance complaints from neighbors about this jet gunning its engines for this extended period of time. If you've ever been to Redbird, it's right amongst a bunch of houses. It's in a neighborhood. And so, jets aren't quiet and it's just sitting there. And they don't normally just sit there and idle their engines. It was ready to go. It was ready to transport a quote special passenger. And that special passenger was Oswald, the real Oswald. So they had made preparations to get their asset out of Dallas. He just never made it there. So you can see the prep work that went into being ready when Oswald made it to Redbird, ready to get out of town. And they had to, they were pressed for time because the airspace was fixing to be closed. The president of the United States has just been assassinated. There are national security implications. Nobody knows what's happening. Is there an attack coming? Is Russia going to send missiles? What's going on? They're going to close the airspace. Plus, we have the new president on Air Force One fixing to take off. So they're going to close the airspace for Air Force One to get out of Dodge, which means that plane at Redbird better be out of the up in the air before they close that airspace. So they are limited as far as time is concerned for the purposes of getting Oswald out of there. I say all that to say if the plan was that the doppelganger was supposed to get away and not Oswald, they would have had a similar setup for him. But you're going to see they didn't, and they had to scramble. The Oswald plane was long gone. It had to take off without him. So now they're going to have to scramble to get their doppelganger out of town, out of sight. You can't have they already screwed up once and had it in the same place at the same time with Oswald. They had to cover that up. And they're going to continue to cover that up. But they can't have him run around Dallas, this Oswald lookalike. So what happens next? At 2:00, TF White, if you look at the bottom picture, this is his view. He worked at a garage. It was Mac Pate's garage. I've been there. It's not a garage anymore. Last time I was there, which was last November, they gutted the building. It looks like they're turning it into some sort of a business, like a restaurant, maybe. It's all gutted. The outside still looks exactly the same. And it looks across the street at what used to be El Chico's here, Mexican restaurant. Now it's I don't know, it seems like it's a pharmacy or, some kind of like Walgreens or something. But that's his view as you look over there at that parking lot in front of El Chico's. He's a 60-year-old mechanic. And of course, he's hearing all these police sirens screaming up and down Davis Street. Now, Davis Street, if you're looking, look at the bottom picture, TF White Street. Davis Street is that street behind that white pickup truck. That's Davis Street. It's 1 block away. So if police cars are screaming up and down, blaring their sirens, TF White's going to see it and hear it. It's literally 1 block away. And his view is unimpeded by an open parking lot. You can see the cars going back and forth. And of course, he's hearing radio reports describing a suspect loose in Oak Cliff somewhere. So put 2 and 2 together. The police are out. The sirens are going because they're looking for the suspect. And it's here in Oak Cliff. At 2:00, White notices a red 1961 Falcon parked across the street in this El Chico parking lot. The driver was sitting in the car, just sitting there. And according to White, every time the police would go by, the guy would duck down like he was hiding. So naturally, that catches T.F. White's attention. So after his lunch break, he's just kind of keeping an eye on him. Um, After his lunch break, White points out the car to his boss, Mac Pate, the owner of the garage. Here's another view. I just turned it around from the other side. So you see Mac Pate's garage in the background. There's the restaurant. So this view is from Davis Street. Pate tells White, well, keep an eye out because he had heard a radio report involving an assassination attempt against JFK the day before in Houston, and it involved a red Falcon. Interesting. So White eventually, curiosity gets the better of him. He walks across the street to get a closer look. The driver, who's wearing a white t-shirt, turns and looks right at White, according to White, full face. And the two stared at each other for a moment. And then White turns and begins walking back to his workplace, but he had memorized, when he looked at the license plate, he memorized it. So he wrote it down, he put it in his pocket. Later that night, White, just like Bernard Haire, is sitting there watching TV. He sees Oswald's image and he says, that's the guy in the red Falcon. But wait a second. I saw him at 2. They arrested at 1:45. How could that be? The guy I saw was sitting there in the front seat of a red Falcon. They said that at 1:45 they arrested him, and I just saw the footage of him being taken out the front of the Texas School Board or the theater. In other words, the guy they arrested is downtown at DPD headquarters. At the same time, I'm looking at his exact replica in this Ford Falcon. So he ponders the story in his mind for a week or two. And he finally tells Wes Wise, who is a Dallas newscaster. This is about 2 weeks later after the assassination. And of course, he had written down the license number. So he gave Weiss the story and the license number. So Wise, being a newsman, tracks down the plate and finds out that the guy who owned the car was Carl Amos Mather, who lived in Garland, Texas, which is right outside Dallas. I've been there. I've ridden my bike through Garland many times. So Wise wants to learn about this Mather guy, and he finds out, guess what? Mather does high security work as an independent, as a contract agent for the CIA. And incidentally, the Mathers were best friends with the Tibbets. Now, at the moment that Wes Wise is learning this, it means nothing to him. All these events seem unrelated. Now, 60 years later, they're all very much related. You see how ancestral this plot is. So there's your first sighting of the doppelganger. Wait, actually, it was your second. Your first sighting after the Texas, after he enters the theater. There's your first sighting at the theater location. Then your second one is him being arrested and taken out the back by two witnesses, Burroughs and Bernard Haire. And now that was 15 minutes ago. By the way, if you go to Oak Cliff, it's not a big place. And so this location where T.F. White worked is just a few blocks behind from Jefferson Avenue, where the Texas Theater is. It's just, it's about a mile. It's about a mile, maybe a little less than. It's easy walk, sidewalks. I'm sure he wasn't walking. Remember, the police took him out, put him in their car. They're not going to let him just walk about. But he ends up in this CIA man's car, hiding out at this Chico's restaurant. He said, well, they got to get him out of there. Well, that's what comes next. So this next sighting or piece of evidence, I've labeled it 3:30 because that's the moment at which he was picked up. All right, so he's got to kill. You figure 3:30 is the pickup time, 1:45 is the time of arrest. So he's literally the folks in charge of getting the Oswald doppelganger out of Dallas were able to adjust on the fly and get him out within an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. And look at the levers they have to pull to make this happen. This guy's witness, his name is Robert G. Vinson. So I'm introducing you to some witnesses: Butch Burroughs, Bernie Haire, T.F. White, and now Robert Vinson, who are all witness to the doppelganger. Two of them watch him get arrested out the back, and these other two are witnesses to what happens to him after. Anyway, this guy was in the United States Air Force. He was a sergeant, and he was in NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command. The day before all of this, he had met with a Colonel Chapman at Andrews Air Force Base in D.C. He'd recently been promoted. He was going over the paperwork. According to Vinson, while he was in Chapman's office, the phone rings and Chapman engages in a separate phone conversation, to which Vinson is privy because he's sitting there. And he hears Chapman telling the person on the other end of the line that, quote, he would highly recommend that the president not go to Dallas, Texas on Friday because there had been something reported. That is something that he files away in the old memory bank. The next day, Vinson departed Andrews Air Force Base in D.C. on a C-54 cargo plane, and he was going home to Denver. His home was actually in Colorado Springs. His wife was going to pick him up in Denver. He's going to Lowry Air Force Base. He hitched a ride. And nothing is out of the ordinary so far, except for that phone conversation, which intrigued him. But when he went to the plane, what he noticed was it had no military markings on it or serial numbers. All it had on the back tail fin was a rust brown graphic of an egg-shaped Earth. That's what he remembered. And it had white grid marks crossing it. And he knew what that was. That's a CIA plane. So he's hitching a ride on a CIA plane. And when he gets in, the plane's completely empty. There's two other men who turn out to be the pilot and the co-pilot. But other than the three of them, there's nobody else on the plane. And this wasn't out of the ordinary. I've talked to people. I used to go to a Sunday school class with a guy who was special forces in the military, and every operation he was involved in was covert. He couldn't talk about it. But, one of the things he could talk about was how he got from point A to point B. He was always on these planes. He'd leave home, jump on a military transport. Sometimes he was sitting on a crate. Sometimes he got a seat. Sometimes plane was full of people. Sometimes it was full of equipment. It was always interesting to hear his stories. And in this case, Vinson, the plane was empty except for these two other men. And unlike any other flight he'd ever taken, though, there was no manifest. There was no log for him to sign in. There was no crew chief. And the pilots, who normally stand at the door and greet whoever gets on their plane, they were stony silent. He said they never said hi. They didn't make eye contact, nothing. It was like, as if he wasn't even there. So yeah, this is odd. It's a CIA plane, which this must be how the CIA does business. I don't know. So they're flying along, and he's relaxing, and they're over Nebraska on their way to Colorado. And one of the pilots turns to the other or announces flatly over the intercom that, quote, the president was shot at 12:29. So no doubt there's no other stimuli really. So he's on this empty plane. And so when the intercom says something to the effect the president was shot 12:29, that's something you would remember. And then what he remembers next is the plane immediately banks into a sharp left turn and begins heading south. In other words, it's not going to Denver no more. At 3:30, Vinson looks out the window. So this is 3 hours later. And they started in Nebraska, and then that's where they made the turn. And he looks out the window and he sees the skyline of Dallas. Then the plane, after it comes in over Dallas, lands not at Love Field, not at Redbird, but in an out of the way location in a rough, this is according to his definition, a rough, sandy area along a river. Well, there's one river that runs through Dallas. It's the Trinity River. He said it was not a runway. It was more like a road under construction. Now, it's interesting. I've spent some time down here in this Trinity River basin. And the Trinity River winds all around and it separates Dallas from Oak Cliff. It's right in the middle. That Houston Street viaduct that we talked about goes over the Trinity River basin, is where Tippett was sitting at the Glaucos gas station waiting for the bus to come across. It's in 63, it was the main thoroughfare connecting the two. You go down into this river basin, they have all kinds of walking trails and nature conservatory type stuff. And construction, there's a lot of construction going on down there. I don't know what they're building, but it looks like they're always building something. I've been there 3 or 4 different times. And there's always construction going on. And there's this network of dirt roads runs along the river. And you can see sometimes where it would flood and then go back down. And, but it's out of the way, as you can see, especially, in November when all the leaves are still on the trees. These Texas live oaks, they don't lose their leaves until the following spring. So this picture right here looks like a spring photo. But you could imagine a scenario where a plane could land on one of these roadways. And some of the roads are pretty wide. Like this road here is pretty narrow, but some of the roads are pretty wide because they've got like construction traffic going back and forth. So, these big dump trucks and bulldozers and things. So, and it just goes and goes and goes. This particular section is downtown, but you can go outside of town. In this particular location where Vinson, he could still see the skyline. So I'm assuming it was close to downtown, probably near this location where this photo was taken. Anyway, they land on it. Vinson's looking out the window and he sees 2 men running towards the plane from a Jeep, which had been parked, like it had been waiting, and now it was backing out. It dropped the 2 men off, the plane had landed, now the Jeep's leaving. Both pilots came back to where Vinson was sitting. They unlatched the passenger door, waved the 2 men on the plane. Vinson is just sitting there watching all this. 2 men pass him as they get on the plane. They don't look or speak to him. And they're both dressed, according to Vinson, in off-white beige coveralls, like they're highway workers or something, which would blend right into this, what appeared to be a construction site. And both men took their seat right behind the cockpit, never spoke to Vinson, never spoke to the pilots. The pilots didn't speak to them. Nobody said a word. No hello or welcome or you can sit here, nothing. They just jumped on the plane. No, Vinson's watching this whole thing. When he's asked to describe these men, he said the one was taller and bigger, and he was a Latino, a Cuban. And the other was a short, small man, 5'7" to 5'9", 150, 160, a Caucasian, a white man. And if you know anything about the history of the doppelganger in Dallas before the assassination, you know that on several occasions, two, in some cases, three men, always a tall Latin and a shorter Latin, and a white guy who resembled Lee Harvey Oswald, whom nobody knew at the time, but later people said that that was Lee Harvey Oswald, made their appearance in and around Dallas all over the place. In one particular case, they were on the front porch of Sylvia Odio and her sister, and they were pretending to be talking to them about an anti-Castro Cuban organization that needed money, needed support, and wondering if they could help them out, et cetera, et cetera. They were there trying to enlist the Odio sisters' support. And they very pointedly introduced the white man to them as Leon Oswald. The Warren Commission even believed, they knew this story, and they believed that a man named Billy Seymour was this imposter posing as Oswald, who claimed to be Leon Oswald. Why the Odio sisters remembered this story was because the next day, this tall one, who we now know was a anti-Castro figure in all of these CIA-backed organizations, called Bernardo de Torres. Bernardo de Torres was the tall Latin that was always seen in the company of this Lee Harvey Oswald doppelganger. They were almost always together. In fact, if you know the story of Richard Case Nagel, Nagel told Oswald he was being set up by these two Latins that he was always hanging out with. So Oswald had infiltrated this anti-Castro organization, was reporting back to the FBI. He was an FBI informant. So he's always hanging around these guys. And Nagel felt pretty sure that they were setting him up to be a patsy in the JFK assassination. Told Oswald. Oswald didn't believe him. That's a whole nother story, very interesting story. But over and over and over again, you see Oswald, or this Oswald doppelganger, in the company of Bernardo de Torres. And you also see the real Lee Harvey Oswald in the company of Bernardo de Torres. In the Odio sisters case, it was the doppelganger, Billy Seymour. At least that's who the Warren Commission believes it was. I believe there were multiple Oswald doppelgangers, but in this particular case, they named him as Billy Seymour. Anyway, so the question is this that same Bernardo de Torres on the plane with this same Oswald doppelganger that they've literally just rescued from Oak Cliff by rerouting this plane at the last minute over Nebraska, sending it to Dallas, landing in this construction site in the Trinity River basin, picking him up. It was obviously not part of the plan. It was a change of plans. And Vinson just happened, if this was the plan, there's no way in hell Vinson's on that plane. Because it's not till later that the CIA realizes, holy crap, there's a witness to this whole thing. And that becomes a real problem going forward for them and for Vinson, by the way. Anyway, just some side details there. But according to Vinson, then, after the guys got on the plane, took their seats, pilots resumed their seat. The C-54, which had never stopped its engines, it's just sitting there idling, just like the plane that Redbird had been idling for Oswald, took off in a northwest direction. And off they went. Plane flies and flies, gets dark. A little after dusk, the plane lands on a runway. And so Vinson is assuming in his mind, since they were going to Lowry Air Force Base in Denver, that though they detoured to Dallas, that they were now in Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. He's just assuming that. As they land, he says the two pilots get up and leave first. They rush right past Vinson to the door. It's like, we got to get out of here. And then the other two passengers follow slowly, quickly behind. Nobody says a word. Anybody. Vincent's just, as he has been the entire flight, he's just sitting there like he doesn't exist. He's a wallflower. And he says, for a few minutes, I was by myself on the plane. He says, quote, that was strange, very strange. I couldn't understand why there was such a rush. They just bailed out. So he's thinking he's in Colorado, but when he gets off the plane, the surroundings are unfamiliar. So he starts heading for the nearest building, looking around, and there's nobody there. The base is completely deserted. So he asks an air policeman, where am I? And the guy tells him, you're at Roswell Air Force Base in New Mexico. It's about 200 miles from the border. So then he asks, am I allowed to leave the base and catch a bus to Denver? And the guy tells him, the air policeman says, no, the base is on high alert. No one can come in or go out. So Vincent's thinking, well, we just came in. And he starts putting the pieces together, realizing there were 5 people on that plane. One of them, at least, maybe 2, but one for sure, was not supposed to be seen by anybody. So they close the base, they land the plane, everybody scatters to the 4 winds. And the doppelganger, who is only 200 miles from the border, is now out of Dallas safely and close enough to the border where he can be driven across the border. I'm speculating here, but it's not coincidental that he was flown down to the closest Air Force base next to the border. They're getting him out of the country. And that's me talking. So Vinson has to wait for this alert to pass. So he goes and he takes a seat in the waiting room for a couple hours. Next morning, uh, hops a bus and gets to Colorado Springs. And of course, his wife, curious what happened. So he's telling her the story about these 2 strange men and the pilots and the strange plane and being left alone and landing in Roswell of all places. So that night they're watching TV, just like Bernie White, just like TF White. And they're getting all this news coverage. This is November 23. This is the day after the president was shot. It's wall-to-wall coverage. Robert Vinson's watching the television. And he can't believe. He says, that, of course, Lee Harvey Oswald's image is all over the television screen. Arrested at 1:45 in Dallas, taken downtown. He's currently being questioned. It flashed the picture. He's like, that's the guy on the plane. And she's saying, are you nuts? He's in jail. Vincent says, quote, I swear, that's the little guy who got on the plane. Not the tall Latin. That's the little guy who was with him. So there you see, when we get into this a little deeper, I'll draw some conclusions because we're going to see what happens. More evidence is going to emerge in later years about what happens to another patsy who was in Dallas that day. The extreme measures the CIA took to get him out of the country and where his destination was. And then we find out pretty quickly after the assassination, because Jack Martin spills the beans in New Orleans, that David Ferry had driven to Houston on the night after the night of the assassination. And according to Jack Martin, was supposed to be Oswald's getaway pilot to a specific location. And you start putting that piece together with the fact that there was a plane at Redbird, a CIA plane waiting for Oswald. And you realize the intent was to fly Oswald out of Dallas to Houston, where Ferry would pick him up and fly him down to his specific location. I don't want to give that away yet because it's the same location all these other people are going to end up. And there's a specific purpose for it. It's part of the operation. They're all going to end up in the same place for a specific purpose. It's the same template being used over and over and over again. They just had to adjust the plan because Oswald didn't make it to Redbird. He ended up getting arrested. So now they got to get the doppelganger out, which tells you who they were planning on arresting if everything had gone to plan. I'm having a hard time not getting ahead of myself. So one of the questions uh, I posited at the beginning of today was what happened to Croy and Westbrook after November 22. So this is the famous scene in the police garage on November 24th when Oswald is led out to his slaughter, literally, and Ruby is waiting, as he was for 2 days in the Dallas Police headquarters, for his opportunity. Now, you can't quite see him here in this picture, but Ruby is standing right directly behind Sergeant Croy, the same Sergeant Croy who, with Westbrook, helped engineer everything around the Tippit scene and helped get Oswald to the Texas Theater and all the things that happen in and around that whole oakcliff setting. Here he is again. And here's Ruby again. Remember, Ruby was in the Texas Theater. It's the same cast of characters waiting for Oswald to come out that door. Here's the next picture here. Now you can see Ruby, and now you can't see Croy because he's behind this guy. And so they've both moved forward, which means Croy is now behind this guy in the foreground here, and Ruby's moved forward, so now you can see him. And people are starting, you see this guy here, he's turned his head. This guy here, he's turned looking at the door. All these people are looking at the door because that door's fixing to open, and out will come Oswald. Ruby is being almost like he's being led by Croy to Oswald so he can do what he's been assigned to do. So Croy is still carrying out his part of the plan. He's literally escorting Jack Ruby to his mark. That was on November 24. What about Westbrook? In 1967, so 4 years later, Westbrook retires from the Dallas Police, actually 66, so 3 years later, and he joins USAID, which is a CIA cover, if there ever was one. When the CIA, when people were in USAID, like uh, the Paynes had a history with USAID, for example. Uh, anyway, it's one of the reasons why Trump and Doge shut down USAID here within the last year, took away all its funding because it was just a CIA front to launder money through and carry out all kinds of covert operations around the world in the name of human, you know, human interests or humanitarian causes, et cetera, et cetera. It's anything but. Ask some of these third world countries about USAID. None of them, they all knew what it was. So Westbrook retires from Dallas Police, joins USAID as a quote police advisor in South Vietnam in 67. This was an agency-run police program. It had three purposes: to train overseas police, friendly overseas police, in the ways of American intelligence, to allow the CIA to, quote, plant men with local police in sensitive places around the world, and to, quote, to bring the U.S. prime candidates for enrollment as CIA employees. It's a front. It's a CIA front. He's joining. By the way, we'll see this in 68 when Bobby Kennedy gets assassinated in L.A. The two L.A. policemen that run the investigation and rig it so as to point the finger of blame at the patsy, Sirhan, and away from Thane Eugene Caesar, the CIA hitman that took him out, uh, are two policemen who come from this U.S. aid program overseas and have been recruited into the L.A. Police Department from U.S. aid. In other words, they're CIA guys. So this is a pretty widely known program that had, uh, and of course, if you get recruited into this program, it's because you have prior experience or you have attracted the attention of the CIA in such a way that they think you are a prime candidate. Uh, or like in Westbrook's case, you can go overseas. You've been operational for years now at home. Now you can go overseas and train overseas police to do what you've been doing for years back home. So Westbrook is now in Vietnam where the war is happening. And he is there as a CIA operative working in this U.S. aid program. Here's a picture. Westbrook, far right, circled in red, posing with a self-confessed CIA assassin named David Morales, whom we know was in Dallas on the day JFK was killed. We know that because his spotter was actually arrested, James Eugene Braden, in the Daltex building. He was also in Chicago 20 days prior trying to assassinate Kennedy there. We know that because both he and Braden were arrested in Chicago and released, according to Abraham Bolden. So this guy has history with the CIA and assassinations, having been in Chicago where they tried to kill JFK, having been in Dallas where they did kill JFK, and where he worked with Westbrook in the setting up of the Patsy in Oak Cliff and all these other moving parts that were happening. So here they are again, reunited in Vietnam. According to John Gilligan, who was the director of USAID under Jimmy Carter, quote, at one time, many USAID field offices were infiltrated from top to bottom with CIA people. The idea was to plant operatives in every kind of activity we had overseas, government, volunteer, religious, every kind. James Angleton, in a memo, said, quote, the CIA does not maintain direct contact or liaison with any law enforcement organization, local or federal, at home or abroad. When the need arises, such contact is sometimes made on our behalf by USAID. USAID, according to Angleton, was the liaison between the agency itself and all the law enforcement apparatus, whether local or federal, whether home or abroad, domestic. USAID was the liaison in between CIA and those entities. So this is a CIA front that he's a part of. So you see what happens to Croy. He continues carrying out his part of the operation by leading the hunter to the prey, Ruby to Oswald, 2 days after the assassination. And Westbrook retires from Dallas PD and goes back to work for his main employer, the CIA, over in Vietnam, training. You can see in this pictures, probably these young guys here in between him and Morales are being trained by them too on how to either training them for purposes of working in the new Vietnam after we win the war as our little puppets, or maybe recruiting them to work for the agency itself, whatever their purpose. It's no doubt about who the employer is. It's the CIA. So Westbrook fell into a better opportunity after he proved himself in Oak Cliff in 1963. Okay, so I told you in the first day of this series, I had broken this topic into 3 parts. The first part was the hour by hour, day by day sort of timeline, the facts of the case. And that took my first 3 episodes. So we've just concluded that part. The next part of the story involves a confession that emerges in 1971 that ties back to everything we just learned. So we're going to get into that next. And then, of course, the final part is my conclusions, which I have, based on all my years of research into this, and also based on my own logic and reasoning, I've decided to go ahead and take a step out into the great unknown and tell you what I think happened in this whole scenario. And I think Oak Cliff, because of the presence of the Oswald doppelganger, and because it's the first time we see mistakes made and how they react to those mistakes, you realize that it is the Rosetta Stone to understanding the entire JFK assassination. Oak Cliff is key, absolutely key. And of course, the Warren Commission, the FBI know that, which is why they're going to hide the fact that there's a doppelganger. They're going to hide the fact that Jack Ruby was in the theater. They're going to hide the fact that there was a second wallet. They're going to hide all of this evidence of the report, for example, that said that Ruby and doppelganger were both in the theater at the same time, Oswald. All of this gets hidden from the American people, proving yet again that none of the investigation, from Dallas police to FBI to CIA to Warren Commission, none of it was legitimate. None of it was credible. None of it is worth the paper it's written on. Don't take anything from the Warren Commission's report, from the FBI say so, CIA say so, from Dallas police. Don't take any of it. Don't believe any of it. It's garbage in, garbage out. It was all prearranged, it was all set up, which is why they had that photographer in place at all the key places in advance. It's like he got a written itinerary. It says at 12:40, take a picture of this bus. Next, take a picture of the 6th floor window at Texas School Book Depository. At 1:45, be across town, across the river at the Oak Cliff, Texas Theater in front, because you're going to want to take a photo of that. It's unbelievable. It's all prearranged. All right, that's enough for today. Thanks for joining. And until next time, God bless. Thank you.